very sorry if I've taken up my time, but this particular question, that was raised is actually one of the proofs given in the Kalam cosmological discussion. That if you need thought information in order to think, then we couldn't have thought without somebody giving us information first. It is a proof of a creator, and it's upon someone else really to say that's not true.
Like me, for example. I can, of course, use the arguments that have been presented to prove that I am not here, because I had to step through an infinite number of infinitesimal steps to stand in this position. And I'm afraid, therefore, since that is impossible, I am not here. But let me take your question, sir, about the first thought. None of this nonsense about the Kalam argument. I mean, let's be real. What thought is electrical and chemical activity in the brain that emerged as the cellular structure, the neuronal structure of organisms emerged. So thought, that is the panoply of electricity, if you like, going on in a collection of neurons and their synapses, grew. You don't have to go back into these sort of metaphysical arguments. All you've got to do is look at the reality of the world and see the evolution of neuronal connections. That is how thoughts emerge.
Very briefly, if we're going to talk about reality, then we shouldn't talk about the distance from here to here as being a series of infinitesimal steps, but we should talk about it as being 6 or 7 feet. Here's the gentleman in purple. Council quiet, please. Thanks.
The previous question asked about the initial thought was reformulated as being electrochemical reactions. But even then, we just start rephrasing the question. It is mechanical reactions. Even that needs to be caught and lead back to something. And yeah, that is then, this goes back to the same question again. So I think that's an answer.
Okay, Omar?
Yeah. This is actually a question for Dr. Omar. You appear to have problems with the idea of infinity. There are mathematicians who don't have the same problems. In fact, they can conceive of different orders of infinity. Are they as muddled as believers think that us non-believers are?
Okay. One more question from the back somewhere. Gentleman right at the back, furthest back.
Okay, I just wanted to perhaps agree actually with the atheist Dr. Atkins, in the sense that you put the case that believers have to put a positive case for their belief, rather than atheists having to present their belief in atheism, prove their atheism. But there have been some evidences put forward, so perhaps if you could give some more discussion on your views on that. I mean, particularly the issue of the actual beginning of the universe. You said that you had some proofs that you'd like to present, but so far I've not actually heard what those proofs are. In fact, I've kind of heard the opposite, because as far as what I've heard from you so far, nothing exists, we don't exist, and there are infinitesimal series of steps between us here as well. So I'd just like to understand, what do you understand as, even for example, actually the laws of nature that you've invoked, that the laws of nature are the reason why the universe is here. What are these laws of nature in terms of where did these laws of nature come from? Because we see that there are constraints on what exists in the knowable, visible world. But what is the source of those constraints? How can they be explained? Why
you turn into that speaker, so I'm going to have to ask. I'd like to deal with it very briefly, because I would like to give as much time as possible to the Professor and Alex to deal with the question that was just asked. I think infinity is excellent. I have no problem with it whatsoever. My issue with infinity is not per se My issue with infinity was its ontological export into the real world. It exists in the realm of ideas, it exists in the realm of mathematics, but when you try and bring it into reality, you find yourself dealing with absurd situations that can't exist, and that's my problem with it. Thank you.
Infinity. Mohammed dismissed my argument of saying it was 7 feet, not an infinite number of infinitesimal elements. What about 13.7 billion years? I mean, 13.7 billion years ago, the universe came into existence. That's the same thing as saying 7 feet. You're inventing infinity, making it difficult to understand. A scientist says, go back 13.7 billion years. He doesn't say, go back an infinity of infinitesimal steps.
Right.
Anyway, gentleman at the back, the laws of nature, I think you need to understand what a law of nature is. A law of nature is our commentary on the behavior of matter and whatever else there is, radiation. So it's as matter comes into existence, however it comes into existence, then it, through its own, if you like, personality, it acquires a way of behaving. And we the scientists, observe that manner of behaving, and we call that a law of nature. It's like saying that light travels in straight lines is a law of nature. Well, obviously I'm simplifying that. But you then ask, well, why does light travel in straight lines? How did that rule get imposed upon it? And what you do, you look at the nature of light, in particular, the wave nature of light, and see that, quite remarkably, if you allow perfect freedom to the propagation of waves, absolute freedom, not constraining it at all, then through the interference of the waves, it appears that light travels in straight lines, because the only surviving paths are the paths that are close to a straight line. So it's the intrinsic nature of matter and radiation that leads us to express its behavior as a law.
I'll let you have 1 minute response and then they want to come back.
I'd like to question the professor slightly further, in that if at the moment we seem to be waiting, or a position is being taken which is, let's wait for science to come up with an explanation and maybe it will do one day. In the meantime, the only explanation for the universe on the table is the one we presented. So, the only explanation on the room must be the best explanation in the room. However, that's a minor point. The major point I'd like to get at is when the professor talks about in time, science may be able to encroach on Planck time, the first 10 to the minus 43 seconds, and before that, does he see, or can he give us some indication of the path that might be traversed, or what sort of directions things might go in to get to this sort of explanation?
Recreation revisited.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
Your explanation is by no means the only one on the table. Almost every of the thousands and thousands of religions in the world has its own ulterior explanation. And I can think of 100 different explanations, none of which I think are right off the top of my head. The only limit on the number of explanations is our ability to imagine them. But also, your point about science is that we're all just kind of sitting back and thinking at some point science will come up with something.
Just quoting the professor.
No, I'm quoting you. You said that we were imagining that at some point science would discover something. And science is not divorced from the way that we behave. I think Peter Atkins would probably agree with me and say that what we should do is try and develop the knowledge that we have of the world in such a way that we eventually come to a point where we understand the beginning of the universe more. It's not just this kind of apathetic, someone will work it out at some point.
I'm going to take some more questions now. The young lady there.
This is sort of looking at sort of an observation, maybe a question on the scientific method. Researchers, they did some research looking at human emotions, and they found one of the first emotions that the early human had was fear and awe. And it wasn't sort of from animals chasing them, it was fear of something greater. And that's a piece of scientific research that sort of concluded that it was a fear of a higher being. Now, the question that I've got relates to the comment that, well, to do science, we need language to sort of write up our analysis and our evaluation. We need mathematics to sort of measure things and calculate them. We need some sort of psychology to communicate things. So it's a cohesive sort of looking at the all-round picture. So in the scientific method that's been presented, it sort of comes across as quite narrow in a sense that it's not looking at the broader picture, looking at sort of emotions, and also evidences as well. For example, in the Quran 1400 years ago, it said that the mountains are like pegs, and now sort of geologists and geographers have only reached that conclusion in sort of the 20th century, and they've also concluded that a book sort of 1500 years ago would by no means, they wouldn't have had the equipment or the knowledge to have come up with those, so what of the scientific proofs that are presented in religion and sort of looking at the all-round picture? Sorry. That's the question.
I'm not sure your explanation of infinity is very good at all, as a mathematician colleague has said. And to imply that infinity is a mathematical concept which is outside of reality, is to imply mathematics outside of reality, which is weird. Mathematicians do, and mathematicians are real people. Also, if you know anything about physics, also you know that the word nothing is far more difficult to describe than what you present. But my question is, assuming that there is a first cause, why is your first cause God and not the scientific explanation of the universe? I see it as you could just say the universe emerged, science explains how it has, and then that is the first cause. Implying there's the first cause on top of that one, the cause on top of that one is sort of overcomplicating an already simple explanation. I don't see the point.
First of all, thanks to Professor Atkins. I've got a question for you. It's about objective morality, and I would like to know your reaction as an atheist to the situation I will describe, and if that situation or my question is scientifically or philosophically not nonsense for you, I have another second question which I think is probably shorter. I'm going to have some ifs in my question. If you have a child, and if your child is little, 2 years old, and consider yourself in a situation that you have to choose the life of either you or your child. And in that situation, there is no harm in either death of you or your child to anybody else. And scientifically, in all scientific ways, your life will benefit the world better, but it doesn't harm anybody else. For example, you're an experienced man, you're a professor at Oxford University, so you can help others better than your child, which will probably less than you in scientific positions. So